Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar about new starters in Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter, and I am joined by my colleague Alice, who's standing by in the background, ready and waiting to answer any questions. Let's now take a look at what we'll cover in today's webinar. So we're going to be starting by exploring the type of information you will need to add a new starter to your Sage 50 payroll software. And we'll take a closer look at the starter forms that you can use to set your employees up. That would be the P45 and the starter checklist. I'm then going to demonstrate how to add a new starter in your payroll software, either using the employee wizard or the quick employee option. So I'll share a couple of hints and tips around doing that, and also show you how you submit your starter details to HMRC, as they are included automatically in your full payment submission. We're going to finish by answering a couple of common questions and provide some more top tips as part of that section. And then just to wrap up, we've got a short quiz to test your knowledge on your newfound starters knowledge, and you can join in with that quiz, just a bit of fun at the end of the session. So that's what we've got in store for you, and we're going to kick things off by taking a look at the information you would need to effectively set up your new employee records. So I've grouped these into three categories. First of all, you will need your new employee's personal details. It's really important that you enter accurate information when creating their employee record, as the details that you enter here will be submitted to HMRC and used to match that employee to an employment record on HMRC's systems. So the key personal details you'll need are the employee's full name. So it must be their full name as in an identity document, so no abbreviations or initials. You would need their address and UK postcode. You need the employee's date of birth and gender, and where possible, the employee's national insurance number. Now, if you don't have the NI number, you can leave it blank, and the system will apply a temporary NI number, which will not be included in submissions to HMRC. But it's important not to make any of this information up. You do need to provide accurate personal details. So always check an official document such as a passport for this information. You will also need to know more about how you're going to pay this employee. So what pay elements will need to be assigned to them? Are they going to be paid hourly, using hourly rates, or are they going to get a fixed salary? If it is hourly rates, you'll need to know their rates of pay and rates of pay for any kind of overtime that they might be doing. It's useful to know how many hours they will be working according to their contract, as this can be recorded in their salary details in the employee record, which is also included in submissions to HMRC. And you'll need to know their start date, as again, this needs to be submitted to HMRC, and you might need to use this date in order to manually calculate how much to pay them in their first pay period, because it's likely that they're not going to be working for that full pay period, depending on when that start date was. And lastly, you will need a starter form for them. Now, most commonly, this will be a P45 that they receive from their previous employer, specifically P45 Part 2. So that is what you give to a new employer once you leave employment. If the employee doesn't have a P45, you should get them to complete the starter checklist, which was previously known as a P46. And a couple of other starter forms that can be used in specific circumstances are the P46 pen, which is when you're taking on an employee who is being paid their pension through a PAYE scheme, and P46 expat, which is for employees that are seconded to work in the UK. But today we're going to focus on by far the most common forms, the P45 and the starter checklist. So you're probably familiar with these forms. Here's a couple of images. So the P45 Part 2 is what the employee needs to give to you. You can also keep hold of Part 3, If they happen to give you part 1, you would give that back to them, as that is their own copy that they need to keep. But the starter checklist provides some useful information that isn't necessarily found on a P45. So you would use a starter checklist if an employee doesn't have a P45, but you also might find it useful to use a starter checklist for all new employees, particularly if they're repaying a student loan, as it will give you more details on the type of student loan they're repaying, and also to capture the employee statement that applies to them. So I want to give you a closer look at some of these starter forms and provide some examples. So we're going to take a look at a couple of examples now. So I'm going to start with the P45. This is the P45 that's generated by Sage 50 Payroll when you make an employee a leaver. So it's typical of the type of form you would receive from a new starter that has left their previous employer. Now, the first page is part 1A, which is the employee's copy. So if they happen to give that over to you, and it's a physical copy, you would give that back to the employee, as they would keep that for their own records. But as a new employer, you would use the P45 Part 2 in order to set up the new employment record. So as you can see here, it'll have a note of the employee's national insurance number and their personal details. It'll confirm the leaving date from their previous employer. And at this point, you should just check that that leaving date is within the current tax year. Now, if it's in a previous tax year before the 6th of April, you can still accept the P45, but you would not need to use any previous pay and tax values, as they will belong in the previous tax year and will not be relevant for the new tax year. So definitely do a check of the leaving date, make sure it is in the current year. You've then got sections that indicate if the employee is currently repaying a student loan. But as you can see, it doesn't tell you what type of student loan that is. You've got the employee's tax code at their leaving date and whether that tax code was on a week 1, month 1 basis. And if it is a cumulative code, it'll also show you the tax period in which they left their previous employment, as well as their total pay and tax to date. So that information will be entered when you set up a new employee record for them in your payroll. Just to show you part 3, so if this gets given to you as well, you would keep hold of this for your own records. Before the introduction of RTI, so over 10 years ago now, you used to send this to your local tax office, but these days you just keep hold of it, as the new starter details will be included in the first full payment submission that you send to HMRC. So you wouldn't need to use this one, but of course you can keep hold of it for your own records. So let's now also take a look at the starter checklist. So this is the PDF version that you can download from the gov.uk website, and we've provided a link to that in your handout. So you get some instructions as an employer and instructions for the employee who is filling in this form. And you can see it captures largely the same information as a P45. So first name, last name, gender, date of birth, and address details. But then as we work through the form, there are some additional questions about which statement matches the employee's circumstances. So they would work through questions 8, 9, and 10, which will allow them to select the relevant statement. And then if the employee doesn't have a P45, the statement they've selected will determine what tax code they go on. So it would either be 1257L on a cumulative basis, if this is their first job since the start of the tax year, 1257L on a week 1, month 1 basis, if they have had another job since the start of the tax year, or tax code BR, basic rate, if they have another job or they're receiving a state, workplace, or private pension. So you'll see there's a drop down to select the employee statement when you set up the employee record. And then on this last page, you've got further information about student loan types. So if there's an X in the box on a P45 to say they're repaying a student loan, you will need to know what plan type they're repaying. So this page of the starter checklist allows them to work out what plan type they're on if they don't already know. They can then indicate the plan type, and it means that you'll be deducting the correct amount of student loan. So really useful form, and I would recommend that you get all new starters to fill in this form or an equivalent form that you've created so that you will have all the information you need when it comes to setting them up. And you can find that starter checklist, as I say, on the gov.uk website. So from here, employees can actually fill it in online if they want to fill in a digital copy and download it, or the PDF version is this link just underneath. So useful for you to have some starter checklists to hand, just to make sure you've got all the information you need. So those are your starter forms. And once you have all of that information, you should then be in a good place to create a new employee record. So that's what we're going to take a look at next. We're going to look at how this works in Sage 50 Payroll. So we're going to focus mainly on creating these records manually, but I will also mention a way of importing details from Sage HR. But if you're doing it manually, you would set up an employee record either using the employee wizard, which guides you through step by step, where you would enter information on each page and move on to the next step, or by using the quick employee option, which, as the name suggests, is a bit quicker, as everything is entered on just the one screen. Now, whichever route you go down, you will need to provide the starter form details, so either from a P45 or P46. And once the record has been created, you'll then be able to add any additional information by opening that employee record and navigating to the relevant areas. So let's now take a look at setting up an employee record for a new starter. So first of all, to find the employee wizard and quick employee options, you would navigate to the employee tasks here in the bottom left corner, and then you will find them in the tasks list. So either employee wizard from here or just underneath employee record. So if I start by clicking employee wizard, you can see it takes you into a screen. And the only option available currently is to record the details of a new starter using their starter form. And then you would work through this wizard by using the next buttons, and then you can start to fill in the details. Now, mandatory fields are the ones that have a little star next to them. So you'd fill in the surname and forenames, put your address and postcode. And when you click onto next, it'll then prompt you to enter the next bit of information to set up the employee record. So it's all pretty self-explanatory. Personally, I prefer to use the quick employee option, as everything's there in one place, but I do want to point out the employee wizard as well. Quick employee, just underneath, takes you straight into this screen where you can enter all of the compulsory details. So again, the fields marked with an asterisk. And you can see here, there's also the option where you enter the starter form details, which will come up as one of the steps in the employee wizard. So this is where you would choose P45, or if the employee has filled in a starter checklist, you would select the P46 option. So it is still labeled as P46 in Payroll, but that now refers to the starter checklist. So you can start from a blank record like so, but just to share a tip with you, it is possible to copy the settings from an existing employee record, just to keep your records more consistent and to save you a little bit more time when it comes to creating the record. So if you have an existing employee that's going to do the same job as your new employee, perhaps it's a like-for-like replacement, you're taking on someone that's going to be replacing an employee who's leaving. If you select an existing record first, in your employee list, and then go into either Employee Wizard or Quick Employee, you'll then be prompted if you want to copy over their information. So just to show you, if I click Employee Wizard, we now have some additional options. So we can create a record based on an existing employee if we want to copy their settings, or if it's a leaver who previously left and has now rejoined your payroll, you can choose the option to re-employ an employee, and that will also copy over their personal details. So great tip there when creating a record. If you select an existing employee first, this time I'll go into the Quick Employee option. Because we've got someone highlighted, it just asks us here, do we want to base it on the existing record? I can go ahead and click yes. So it has filled in some of the details for me this time. For example, the department has been pre-filled, the pay elements have been assigned, the pay frequency and pay method have been matched, and I can now start to enter the details for my new employee. So I'm going to do that now. I'm just going to enter the employee's full name and address, and a postcode. You can enter further contact details. And if you use online payslips and P60s, if you enter the email address here, it will allow you to select the box to enable online services so that you can start uploading their payslips to set them up in Sage HR. So you would select their date of birth, or you'd enter their date of birth, I should say, and select whether you have conducted a right to work check. And if you say yes to this message, you can record details of the document you checked. So there could be details of a passport, for example, with the expiry date and the passport number. Now the RTI payroll ID is assigned automatically for a new record. There should be no good reason to edit this. So leave it as the default reference here. And then we're going to record the employee's start date. So they started on the 13th of July. Got the payment method and frequency. And we've got the option of recording bank details if we choose to do that. Now I'm going to skip ahead to the starter form. So if the employee has given me a P45, that's what I would select from the drop down. And you can see you would fill in the previous employer's tax district and reference, the leaving date from the previous employment, and if that leaving date is in the current tax year, the total pay and tax to date, as well as the tax code from the P45. If they haven't got a P45, this is where you would choose P46. And instead of filling in the details, you would simply select a starting declaration. So this employee chose statement B, and you can see it's automatically assigned the correct tax code for that statement. Then need to fill in the NI number. So again, don't make that up. Make sure you have entered the correct number. You would choose the NI category, which for most employees will be category A. There are different categories if the employee is under 21 or if they're state pension age or older, for example. We're going to go with standard rate. And then if they've indicated that they're repaying student loan or postgraduate loan deductions, you can select the plan types from this drop down. Now, just to mention pensions, it might be that the employee will need to be automatically enrolled into your pension scheme. And if you use the pensions module in order to manage your auto enrollment, it's really important that you run a pension assessment to assign the pension scheme rather than assign it manually. So in this example, I'm not going to assign the pension scheme this way. I'm going to assess my employees in the first period instead, and then they can be put into the pension scheme if they're eligible. So last things I'm going to enter are the employee's salary details. So I'm actually going to enter their gross salary per month. And then we've already got overtime and commission payments assigned to them based off that previous record. So I now have everything required to create the new record. So I can click on to save and clear, or if I need to add another employee with similar settings, I can click save and retain. You'll see that it retains what was copied from the previous record, but I'm now going to close out, and you can see that that new employee record has been added to my employee list. So now that this is created, I can go into the record. I can add any missing information. So for example, on the employment tab, if I go to the salary option, we can fill in the contracted hours from here. And you'll see that automatically the FPS starter box has been ticked, which means that the starter details will be included in our first submission to HMRC. So now that that record has been created, if I was to set my next pay date, it's going to be the 31st of July in this example, I would then be able to enter the payments for that pay run. Now I'm going to skip right away to my last employee in the list. And just to show you, in terms of their salary, which we entered as a fixed amount per month, it has defaulted to the full salary amount. And in this first pay run, what I may need to do is to adjust that salary if they haven't worked for that full period. So I actually only want to pay this employee for 15 working days out of 23 this month. So I'm making an adjustment to their hours or number value and reducing their salary for this month only. And then we can add any additional payments that might be due. And then once we've done a pension assessment, if the employee needs to go into a pension scheme, they'll either be enrolled via the pension assessment option, or if you're doing it manually, if you've assessed them manually, if they need to go into a pension scheme, you can actually add the scheme within their employee record, and you can set the relevant contribution levels. So we've entered the first payment for that employee. And once we've completed our pay run, we are then able to report those details to HMRC in our full payment submission. So that there is a demo of creating the employee record in Payroll. So the top tip there was if you have an existing record that you want to base the employee on, if you select that first, you can then copy over the information required, and then you'll need to fill in either P45 details that the employee has given you, or choose P46 in order to enter information from a starter form. So most people do set the employee records up manually in the software, but if you have set up online payslips with Sage HR, there is another way that it can be done, which I just want to briefly mention. Now, I have linked to the guide that explains how to do this, but if you've set up an employee in Sage HR first, and you might do this if you use the core HR module and you use any of the onboarding features, you then have an option of importing the employee data directly into Payroll. And that way you don't need to create the record separately in the Payroll software. Now, you'll find the option to do this either from the online services tasks or also from the Payroll tasks. You'll find import employee data, and that then will show you if there are any new starter records available to import from HR. And if there is, you'll be able to view the details, and then you'll be able to import those details in order to set up the employee record. So we do cover this briefly in our online payslips and P60s webinar. So we do have a recent recording of that available on our help center. Now, last thing we need to do is to report this new starter to HMRC. And the way that this is done is by submitting an FPS. So as part of the first FPS the employee is included in, it will report the employee's start date, starter declaration, personal details and address, and also any student loan indicator. And you'll be able to tell if there's a starter in your FPS by checking the starter column when it comes to the important information. So just to finish off our demo, I'm going to jump back to Payroll now. So let's skip ahead to the update records step. So I'm just going to complete my pay run for the 31st of July. And when I'm ready to send my full payment submission, it'll prompt me to check my details in the usual way. So user ID and password and company details. But then as part of this submission, if I just scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see that we do have a new starter. So it's including the start date in the submission. It's also going to include behind the scenes the declaration that they signed and all of their details. And that allows HMRC to register the employment on their systems as well. So if I go ahead and click submit, that's my FPS sent to HMRC. And you can see the last FPS date has now updated with the date of that pay run. You can see as well that the FPS starter box has now cleared because their starter details have now been included in that FPS. So simple as that. In order to submit the starter details, if you have still got the P45 Part 3, just keep hold of that for your own records. That does not need to be sent to the local tax office or directly to HMRC. So now that you've seen how it works, I just want to spotlight a couple of common questions that we get around new starters and to provide some answers to these questions as well. So let's just jump straight into our first one. So what happens if the leaving date on a P45 falls into an earlier tax year? So what the software will do, if you enter a historical leaving date, so a leaving date in a historical tax year, is it will disable the previous pay and tax boxes as they don't apply to the current tax year. So it means you can still use the details on the P45, but you would just take the tax code from the P45. You wouldn't use previous pay and tax. Now, in terms of the starter declaration, if the P45 is from the previous tax year and they're on a standard tax code, so one ending L, M, or N, you would simply use the same tax code that was on their P45 and you would choose starter declaration B. If the tax code is BR0T, D0, or D1, you would use statement C. But I have linked to a really useful link from the gov.uk website here on the handout. And that actually takes you through a bit of a wizard that explains what to do when the P45 is in a previous tax year, and also gives you information about what starter declaration you need to use. So if you just follow the steps in this little wizard, it'll tell you the tax code, it will tell you the starter declaration. But in all cases here, you would not enter previous pay and tax. Next question. What should I do if an employee has no P45 or starter checklist? So obviously you need to create the employee record if they need to be paid. So in this instance, you would select P46, but when it comes to choosing a starter declaration, you would choose the option for none. So just to show you what I mean there, I just bring payroll on screen. If I go into the quick employee option, If you choose P46 as the starting declaration, you can select none, and you can see that puts them onto tax code 0T on a week one, month one basis. So they will end up paying tax on all of their earnings until such a time that you either receive a tax code from HMRC or they actually bring in a completed starter checklist or P45. So that's how you handle it if you don't have the starter form and you need to pay the employee. And last question here, what if that P45 or starter checklist arrives after the employee's first FPS? So what you do here depends on whether you've received a tax code from HMRC. So if you have not received an updated tax code notice from HMRC, you can enter the details of the starter form using the starter form wizard. And that can then be used on your next pay run. If you have received a tax code notice from HMRC, you can just discard the starter form you've been given. So the tax code provided by HMRC kind of supersedes the information on that form. And just to show you where that starter form wizard is, if you go into the employee record, you'll see there's a starter form option. So let's say we have now received a P45. We can choose that as the starter form we've received. We can then go ahead and enter the details, selecting the correct tax code, previous pay and tax, and that will then update the record with the latest starter form details. So it's this starter form wizard that can be used for an existing record. So those are the three common questions that I wanted to spotlight. And we're just going to sort of finish up. And I've got three questions to ask you. I've got a little bit of a knowledge check, just a quiz that you can join in if you want to. We're going to use the polling feature in order for this quiz. So we're going to ask the question, going to give you some possible answers. You select the answer and click submit, and then we'll just take a look and see whether you got the answers correct. So I'm going to bring the first question up on screen now. So first question for you is which of the following is not included on a P45? So which of the following is not included on a P45? So is it the national insurance category? Is it the employee's previous pay and tax details? Or is it the employee's tax code? So which of those would you not find on a P45? Great, and we'll have a look at your answers. So we've got 84% saying national insurance category, 11% previous pay and tax, and 5% saying tax code. The correct answer for that one is the national insurance category. So you'll see an NI number if the employee had one with their previous employer. You would usually see previous pay and tax if the employee was on a cumulative tax code. And the tax code at leaving will always be on a P45, but it's the NI category that isn't included. So they would usually be on category A for standard rate contributions, but other category letters can be used depending on the employee's age and other circumstances. So well done if you got that one right. Question 2. So how do you send new employee starter information to HMRC? Do you do this by submitting the employer payment summary, or EPS? Would you send part 3 of the P45 to HMRC? Or would you submit a full payment submission, FPS? So which of those is used to send new employee starter information to HMRC? Okay, looks like most of you have got this one. And I'll share those results. So 100% saying you would send an FPS, and you're absolutely right. As you've just seen, the starter details are now included in the full payment submission. No need to do anything with part 3 of the P45. So just keep that for your own records. And the employer payment summary, generally used to report statutory payments you've recovered, CIS deduction suffered, or apprenticeship levy values. And last question of this mini quiz is true or false. I don't need to enter previous pay or tax details if a new employee left their previous employment in the last tax year. Is that true or false? I don't need to enter previous pay and tax details if a new employee left their previous employment last tax year. And we've had most of the vote in there. And I can see there that 90% are saying that is true, 10% saying false. The correct answer on that one is true. You don't enter previous pay and tax details if the leaving date was in the previous tax year. And once you enter that leaving date in the new employee option, so employee wizard or quick employee, it will actually grey out those fields. So you wouldn't be able to enter them anyway. The reason for that is those figures are not used in the tax calculation in the current tax year because they belong in the previous one. And that is the end of our mini quiz. Well done if you got 3 out of 3 in that quiz. And that brings us to the end of what we're going to cover in the webinar. We're going to ask you to stick around a few more minutes in case you have any questions you'd like us to answer. So do drop those in the Q&A and we'll get around to sending the answers out to those. But I did want to mention some of the upcoming webinars for the rest of this month. So on Thursday, we have a session on the HMRC secure mailbox. So this is a great way of accessing and applying tax code and student loan notices directly in your payroll software. So find out all about that on Thursday at 11 a.m. We've got our Master in Mistakes session all around correcting errors, either restoring backups or using rollback. Got a session on processing levers, the payroll assistant option, and also variance reporting. So if you'd like to come along to any of those sessions, get yourself signed up at sage.co.uk/webinars. As always, you can find further support in our help centre at sage.co.uk/help or by selecting any help icon in your payroll software. From there, you'll also find contact details for our support team. So just follow the get in touch links if you need to reach out. And just to mention as well, we do now do personalised training. So you can book a Sage one-to-one remote training session with one of our experts, providing clear solutions that you can use to benefit your business immediately. We tailor these sessions to your requirements. So perhaps you're brand new to Sage Payroll, you've just come into the role and you're looking for that bit of bespoke support. Do get in touch and we can give you more details on that service. Simply scan the QR code to complete our enquiry form. Or follow the link in your follow-up email and we'll be in touch with more details. So like I say, we'll keep the webinar open a few more minutes just to make sure that we've answered your questions. If you'd like the copy of the handouts, don't forget to download those before you leave us. And when you do leave the webinar, you'll be invited to complete our survey. So it'd be great to know what you thought of today's session. Any feedback that you might have is most welcome. We do read all of your feedback and we try to use that to improve our webinars moving forward. So if you could do that, I'd very much appreciate it. So I'm going to go on to mute briefly just to check on the questions. and I will come back to you just before we wrap things up. So I'll speak to you soon. Hi again, everyone. Thank you so much for sending those questions through. I think we've got all of the answers out to those, and we are now pretty much out of time. So if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to complete the survey when you leave us today, I'd very much appreciate that. And do look out for your follow-up email, which will include a link to the recording of today's session. It'd be great to see you on some of our other webinars, so get yourself signed up on our website. But on behalf of myself and Alice for now, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Goodbye for now.